Good?
Yep, we're good.
Alrighty, at this time, I'd like to call to order the September 13th, 2022 meeting of the Auburn Planning Board. We'll begin with a roll call on my far left.
Josh Daigle. Paul Jacques.
Evan Sear.
Stacy LeBlanc. Tony Ferraro.
Riley Bergeron.
And as you may notice, one of our regular members, Mr. Matthew Duvall, will be absent tonight. So in accordance with our ordinance and procedures, policies, we will be elevating one of the associate members to take his place. We alternate, so that means tonight Mr. Josh Daigle will be acting as a full member. That means that he can participate in discussion. Additionally, he can make motion and take votes. Mr. Paul Jacques will continue as an associate member. This means that he can participate in asking questions and discussion. However, he cannot make motions or vote. The next item on our agenda are the minutes to approve the August 9th, 2022 minutes. Are there any revisions? Seeing none, I would seek a motion to approve the minutes of the August 9th, 2022 meeting. There's a motion. Is there a second?
Moved.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. All those in favor? The minutes are approved. I'm assuming an abstention due to absence. So let the record show that Mr. Brian Dubois has abstained due to an absence from that meeting. Next on our agenda is a public hearing for a zoning text and map amendments to create the traditional neighborhood form-based code T42B zoning district and to include 1,687.41 acres of property located in the Court Street City Residential Core area of the city within the new zoning district. We will proceed in our normal manner for a public hearing. That is, we will hear from city staff. There is no applicant, so we will skip that section of our process. We will have questions from the planning board, from members of staff. When we have concluded that, we will open it up to the public comment section of the hearing. I will remind members of the public what our rules are for public comment at that time. When the public comment section has closed, we will enter the debate and possibly final vote. Having said that, is staff ready to present?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
I just want to start out by reading a memorandum from Jensen Bard, Sally Daggett, who's our new attorney, basically laid out the guidance for us for the process for this public hearing process and zoning ordinance amendments. And she's got a letter here that's dated September 8th, 2022, and I think it's important that the public hears this in terms of, we did seek legal counsel. We understand that this is a little bit different process, but this completely meets the ordinance requirements. And I'm just going to read it verbatim just so everybody can hear it. And this is in Sally's language, not mine. She is our city attorney. She will be at the next council meeting when the council picks this information back up. And so here it goes. I'm writing in response to your inquiry regarding the planning board public hearing process related to zoning ordinance amendments. Specifically, you have inquired whether it is legally permissible for the city council to conduct its first reading on proposed zoning ordinance amendments in advance of the required planning board public hearing. The short answer is yes. State statute requires that the planning board conduct a public hearing on the adoption or amendment of the zoning ordinance with certain notices provided in advance of the public hearing, including a public hearing notice posted at the City Hall at least 13 days before the public hearing, and the publication of notice of the public hearing in a newspaper of general circulation at least 12 days, and again, at least 7 days in advance of the public hearing. Referencing Maine State Statute, Section 60-1474, the city zoning ordinance, contains similar notice provisions and adds local requirements of notice to abutters in section 60-1475. Under section 60-1496 of the zoning ordinance, the planning board must, within 30 days of the conclusion of the planning board public hearing, report in writing the results of the hearing and recommendation of the board and the amendment to the city council. There is nothing in state statute, that the city charter, or the zoning ordinance that dictates the timing of the planning board public hearing in relationship to the city council's first reading of the proposed zoning ordinance amendments. Some municipalities with the city council manager form of government prefer to conduct the council first reading before the planning board public hearing to enable council input on the version of the amendments that will be considered and reported on by the planning board. Other municipalities with council manager form of government prefer to have the planning board conduct its public hearing before the council's first reading. In some municipalities, the timing of the planning board public hearing in relationship to the city's council's first reading of the proposed zoning ordinance amendments varies from time to time, i.e. sometimes before the first reading and sometimes after the first reading, depending on the complexity of the subject matter of the amendments. As it relates to the proposed amendments to the zoning ordinance text and map to create a new traditional neighborhood form-based code, T-4.2B district, it is my understanding that the planning board specifically requested it at its June 21st, 22 meeting, that is recommended on the T-4.2 amendments be delayed until after the city council determined what version of the amendments the council wanted to bring forward for final action. Such an approach, whereby the city council conducts its first reading in advance of the planning board public hearing, is legally permissible under the state and local law.
May I ask a question? So, first, to reiterate, what I'm hearing is that this process is such specifically because the planning board sent notice to council that we were tabling it because we did not know what their wishes were.
Yes, that's correct.
Something not covered in the letter, but I'm sure is of question, is that when we began this process, we voted on T42B separately from adoption within a specific zone. I will own that. As staff knows, I was an advocate of doing it that way. However, historically, and during the entire time on my board, the entire time I've been on the board, we have never done that. Is it the case that historically the planning board has adopted a zone with a recommendation to apply it to a specific area at the same time? Is my question clear?
I wouldn't say it's that clear, but what I'm hearing is that this process is a little bit different, but at the same time, it does meet the ordinance requirements.
The process, what's not covered in the letter is the process of adopting a zone, simultaneously applying it to an area within the city. We deviated from our previous practice with T42B by recommending T42B and then taking up each area separate. But historically, the planning board has recommended a zone change concurrently with its adoption within an area, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, I just want to make that clear that people may feel that we are deviating from our process when in fact the process we are currently following is our historical process. We deviated previously by taking up the zone singularly and then looking at areas separately.
That's correct.
Okay, I just wanted to make that clear. Thank you.
Okay, so we will move on to our presentation about T-4.2B in the Court Street area. So for folks who are in the audience, I think I saw many of you pick some things up, but we have a staff report. We have a chart of the actual ordinance showing what is allowed in T-4.2B compared with the other traditional neighborhood development form-based code districts. We also have a map so you can see the area that it is intended to be applied. So I want to start out here with just mentioning the timeline of how we got to T-4.2B. This conversation has been going on for some iteration of T-4.2B over the last year, 2 years even, since 2020, I think is when I saw some of the first meetings happen about this. And T-4.2B is where we've ended up as a result of those meetings and conversations. And so the suggestion today is to hold a public hearing on creation of the new form-based code zoning district, T-4.2B, and the application of the same new zone as a single agenda item and forward a recommendation to council. So the proposal is the Court Street area is currently zoned in the urban residence districts, and the purpose of rezoning is to provide equitable access to housing and walkable neighborhoods by allowing residential uses at a density driven by the form, lot size, and configuration of the lot with less minimum road frontage required and shared driveways encouraged. These changes are recommended in the 2021 comprehensive plan update that support higher density and growth from the city's core outward that is supported by existing infrastructure and smart economic growth. So that's why we're here where we are, and we're just going to talk about first, what is form-based code? So form-based code, the Form-Based Code Institute defines it as a land development regulation that fosters predictable built results and a high-quality public realm by using physical form rather than separation of uses as the organizing principle of the code. So this is meant to be an alternative to traditional zoning, which really focuses on setbacks, tight dimensional regulations, such as not being able to build on a lot if it's under a certain lot size, if it doesn't have the right amount of road frontage. And what that essentially does is traditional zoning encourages homes to spread out over a large area to really meet those sometimes really large minimum lot size requirements. So it really creates sprawl and has made over time many towns and cities need to rely really heavily on roads and their personal vehicles to get from one place to another because everything is really spread apart and where folks live. First of all, single-family homes are separated from multifamily homes, and also single-family homes and multifamily homes are all separated from any kind of business use, often, even if it's small and neighborhood-run. So that creates a need, if you're to go anywhere, to get into your car and travel that way. So form-based code offers an alternative to this by allowing mixed uses within the same kind of area, also allowing different kinds of housing. Instead of regulating the uses and the lot size and the dimensions and things of that nature like traditional zoning, what it does instead is it regulates the physical form of the place. So Auburn's form-based code proposes 6 types of form-based code districts. They are T-4.1, T-4.2B, T-4.2, T-5.1, T-5.2, and T-6. These districts range from the least urban to the most urban. So if you notice T-4.2B, I said before I said T-4.2. That's because it is in fact at a lesser intensity urbanism really than T-4.2. And that's because it has some restrictions on businesses, for example, that we can get into. So just to describe real quick too what the traditional neighborhood development district is. It's characterized by small to medium-sized buildings with smaller front yards and stoops in a more compact urban environment, and includes traditional neighborhood-sized storefronts. The smaller minimum and maximum building setbacks form a moderately dense street wall pattern, diverse architectural styles, and pedestrian-friendly streets and sidewalks. So what is the purpose of applying this kind of zoning to the city core? This is one question that we get a lot, and I think the big reason why we're here and what we need to decide tonight. So first of all, this is the designated growth area as identified in the comprehensive plan. It allows for increased housing opportunity in this area, a wider variety of housing. We'll get into that a little bit later too. It encourages walkability in this area. It creates business opportunity. This area is where there's already existing infrastructure to support more development. This is also where services, amenities, and activities are concentrated, and it's where it would make sense to build housing and other things of that nature around it so people can access them. So here we are going to dive into what this might actually look like in the Court Street area, which we know is not a blank slate. There are already different neighborhoods. We know that some of these neighborhoods are really dense. There are some open areas. Different depending on the street, the yard size can differ. The kind of feeling between the neighborhoods can differ. So how might that affect where you are in your neighborhood? So this map down here shows Auburn divided up by parcel size, and how this might affect you. How this might affect Auburn really depends on where you live. So form-based code encourages development that is meant to fit into the existing environment or the existing form of the neighborhood. So the darker purple units in here, the darkest purple are lots that are 0 to 10,000 square feet. The second lightest color is 10,000 to 21,000 square feet, which is essentially a quarter of an acre to a half acre. And it goes up by quarter of an acre. And if we can see this, most of these parcels here are less than, well, 54.5% of parcels actually cannot support over 4 units. If we think about the density that form-based code lays out, which is 16 units an acre as the general guideline, parcels that are 0.25 acres or less cannot possibly support over 4 units. This is 54.5% of parcels. 79.4% of parcels cannot support over 8 units. So those are parcels that are half an acre or under. So, and out of around 570 acres of parcels with over 5 acres in T-4.2B, only about 390 acres could be open for further development. Think big open, blank slate development, because of existing parks, schools, and condos. So just to take a closer look at this here, we can see this is all the urban core area. You can see that the area that there is to develop has to fit around the existing homes here. So in this area, what we're talking about is mostly going to be, what we're mostly talking about is infill development and opportunity for homeowners to do more with the neighborhoods that are already there. With some opportunities for more housing in the larger spaces as well that make sense for where it is in the city. So we're going to go down a little bit to see some of the density that is already existing in the Court Street area. So these areas are already, they're zoned as urban residential. These are existing neighborhoods. First, we'll look at Hazel Street. This little block here ends up coming out to 19.5 units per acre. This little block is 0.8 acres and 16 units in that, so that's what the calculation ends up being. Existing, there are no high-rise buildings. This is 19 units an acre. That's what it looks like. So next, we're going to go down to Jocelyn Street and Court Street. So you can see here that there are mixed uses in this area. There are single-family homes and multifamily homes. The density in this block is 16.9 units an acre. That's what it comes out to be, and so that's what 16 units, or rather 17 units an acre looks like. Scrolling down a little bit more, we're going to Shepley Street. In this image, there are mostly single-family homes. There is one multifamily home. The density here is 13.5 units an acre. It's existing. It is slightly under 16 units an acre, but I think it falls within the density kind of idea with for possibilities of T-4.2B. None of these homes are currently in conformance, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. So here's another interesting example, I think, because James Street is a pretty dense street. There's 19.3 units an acre on this block. This area is already zoned T-4.2. It has been for a little while now. And I think this is an example where we can see that if you look at this picture on the far left, this home is getting invested in a way that it really would not be able to receive the permits to do if it were still zoned as urban residential. So the homes on this street they do not meet the setback requirements. Therefore, if this were still zoned, if this house was built and it was still zoned as urban residential, they would not be able to build this new porch because it would have encroached further onto the setbacks. So really this zone change in this existing area allows folks who already have homes in this area to make improvements and reinvest in their places and make it better for the folks who are already living there. So I thought that was a really interesting example, and what this does in areas where there are already homes is it opens up opportunities for people. Okay, another question is about businesses. A big question that we've gotten at the past several meetings are, to what extent would businesses be allowed where residential homes are allowed, multifamily, single family, et cetera. So because form-based code does not regulate use, it regulates form, it would allow for businesses. I want you to imagine, as an example of what this might look like, Heathco's on Court Street. So if you imagine Heathco's with like 1 or 2 stories on top with apartments or housing right above it, is what you might be able to expect. Actually, under 4.2B, Heathco's would be a non-conforming business because it does not have an attached dwelling unit. So the business requirements here are that they cannot have a footprint of over 1,500 square feet, and they must have a residence attached. So what that does is it's meant to encourage local folks to open businesses and run those and have them walkable and workable from the area immediately surrounding them. The maximum height of businesses in T-4.2B would be 3 stories and an attic floor. And the 16 units an acre is meant to allow for addition of a 3rd or 4th unit in existing areas. So it's really meant to maximize this parcel that is already taken up by Heathco's, provide a little bit more housing where current zoning does not allow such a thing. So that is an example. So another question that we get is traffic in Auburn is too fast, it's too congested. It gets really backed up in different times of the day. And so the question is, would having more housing, would that affect this kind of traffic? Would T-4.2 make this kind of thing worse? So I would say probably in the short term, likely like more people would probably mean more cars on the road. But increasing density and welcoming housing and business opportunities in the city core could help fund projects to improve road conditions and circulation patterns. So one example of this, and some power actually that the planning board in specific has, is that when new projects come through, there can be conditions to make walkable areas, to install sidewalks, to connect different pedestrian pathways and make it into a walkable area. So over time, as more projects come in and more people come to the area, the city will be able to fund these kind of connectivity and connectivity improvements, really. And an example of that is recently Convenient MD, which is not a housing project, but it is one that I think saw substantial changes with some of the connectivity and traffic items. They came through, and we were able to negotiate for 300 feet of sidewalk where there wasn't before. We were able to improve the circulation within the parking lot by putting in stripe lanes. This one project was able to significantly improve that whole area, and we would expect to see more of the same as things like this continue to come forward. So form-based code encourages and supports safe pedestrian traffic over time, and that decreases reliance too on vehicles because things are closer, sidewalks are there. It's made to walk, and it's made for humans to move about their days without needing to be so reliant on their personal vehicles. That's the goal of form-based code. Another reason why we might apply it to this area is because of the proximity to lots of school districts, or lots of schools. So this map here, the black outline shows the outline of the Court Street area. These colorful splotches on the inside show the radius of walkers who are modeled in GIS. We took a certain distance, I think oh gosh, I will need to check on the distance that we took. We modeled walkers within a certain distance to the schools in GIS, and we can see that everything that falls within everything within this green pattern here, they all can walk to this school, which is outlined in the red. And really, to me, it makes sense to, if the city needs to increase its density, if we need to have more people, why not have folks where there is infrastructure and they can walk to school? So speaking of it, also, by the way, that would that would be an opportunity to extend existing right-of-ways to allow for greater area of walkers, especially around the middle school. That's a point that I'd like to make too. So speaking of schools, more units will mean more kids who will need education. One question that we've got is, what does the school department think about, what does the school board or the school department think about this? Can we handle more students if they were to come to Auburn? Will that overwhelm the teachers or the educators and school staff that we need? Short answer is no. Actually, we had a conversation recently with the superintendent who shared some stats about the way that the enrollment of the schools and how many kids we actually will need to and want to intake. So enrollment is declining and stagnant across schools in Auburn. Some notable examples are Fairview could take about 100 more students. Walton needs about 150 more students, or could take them in, rather. Walton Preschool needed to close because of under-enrollment. East Auburn Preschool has reduced hours because of limited enrollment. And preschool numbers are the best indicator of what the schools can expect in the coming years. How many people are going to be entering into the school system is how many kids are enrolled in preschool and what the trend for that is. And the trend has been declining for that. Altogether, the district can take up to 500 to 600 more students. So that's across the school district. That's how many more students that Auburn can absorb. So speaking with the superintendent as well, this kind of goes into the limited housing issue beyond needing to take kids. It's a real problem that teachers and other essential workers in the city, and also anyone else really, if you're going to extend it, who wants to live in Auburn, it's a problem that they can't find housing, and they can't find enough quality, decently affordable housing to be able to justify living here. So there is a recommended, there's a recommended 28%. So financial institutions recommend that 28% of household income goes to housing. And a teacher's starting salary is about $42,000 a year. About a few years in, that turns into like $45,000. It grows slowly over time. Doesn't cap at a very high number though. A firefighter starting salary is $45,000. Plus OT is an extra $10,000, which is a total of $55,000. A police officer with OT is $65,000. The average price of an existing home in Auburn is $267,500 approximately. An entry-level home. An average new home cost is about $318,000. The 28% of the gross household income recommendation would require a person to make $87,450 a year to afford an existing entry-level home and $104,600 a year for a new home. And for Auburn, this income requirement at this point is 140% of median and 140% of median income for an existing home and 204% over median for a new home. And actually, a little story is that I was really surprised to hear this, that about 90% of the resignations of teachers in Auburn are reported to be because they have found a job closer to home. They didn't want to do the commute anymore. And there was actually a story of a really awesome Latin teacher that had accepted the job, was set to come here couldn't find housing and couldn't take the job. Moved out of state, was planning on doing it, and could not find something to do it, and we lost that teacher. So, so the state of housing really in Auburn doesn't leave people with many options. Myself included, I work in Auburn and live in Lewiston and been kind of looking and really can't find a way to make my way over here. So the prices of homes are high, they continue to increase. And with traditional zoning, most places in the United States, actually about 75%, outlaw any kind of housing that is not single family. That's really limiting for a lot of people. People have mixed incomes, different lifestyles, single family homes, and the price and the cost commitment that takes really doesn't work for a lot of people and folks who would really contribute to the town if they were able to come here and be able to stay here. I think, so that is, yeah, so 75% of the country presenting barriers. So that really, it presents barriers to low and middle income residents. It reinforces housing separation by making it so single family homes have to be apart from multifamily homes. That separates people from other people. And that is just something to think about, that it is essentially illegal in most of the country to have housing that's not single family housing. Form-based code is an increasingly favored alternative to conventional zoning, and it's a powerful tool to handle these present and growing issues regarding housing quality and quantity and opportunities that people can find in their own towns. So moving down to just another little tidbit here. LD 2003 is LD 2003 is a bill that is a law that passed in the state of Maine. We are waiting to see kind of how this law will play out. So, but really the point here is to just say that the state is going to be trending by law towards making it so higher densities in the state are will be required by law. So here is a little tidbit out of LD 2003, the text. So notwithstanding, I'll just read it verbatim, notwithstanding any provision of law to the contrary except as provided in Title 12, Chapter 423A, for any area in which housing is allowed, a municipality shall allow structures with up to 2 dwelling units per lot if that lot does not contain an existing dwelling unit, except that a municipality shall allow up to 4 dwelling units per lot if that lot does not contain an existing dwelling unit and the lot is located in a designated growth area within the municipality consistent with Section 4349A, subsection 1, paragraph AB. If the lot is served by a public special district or other centrally managed water system and a public special district or other comparable sewer system in a municipality without a comprehensive plan. So this is the future land use map. This is the city's designated growth area. It is, it's overlaid in green here. This makes up so the Court Street area falls within this. Right now, it is zoned as urban residential. If we take the LD 2003 provision, and I will say again that we don't know exactly how this will play out because rulemaking has not kind of laid out the different nuances, but by the text, an existing lot in the designated growth area, I picked one here to show. So this is a conforming lot these lots I kind of divided out so they would be conforming lots within urban residential. They all have at least 10,000 square feet, and they all have at least 100 feet of road frontage. So I took one lot and made it into 3 for the purpose of this example. All would be conforming lots if they existed in urban residential today. I applied the setbacks here, the existing urban residential setbacks. So again, this is an example of if LD 2003 were applied to urban residential. This is not T-4.2B. Based on the text, four units can be allowed in the designated growth area on a single lot for within LD 2003. So here I rendered four single-family homes here. It's just a drawing that I made that we made to demonstrate this. And here are 2 duplexes, so another 4 units. This is an existing home and garage. LD 2003 also says that with an existing home and garage, you can add another 2 units to that lot. You could do either a unit attached to the original, a detached unit, either or you could do both. So that's what I rendered here. So this is not to show that this is just to show that the state is moving in a direction unequivocally of really encouraging density in all parts of the state. And this equals out to about 16 units an acre when we look at it like this. So just something to think about if we're thinking about, we've heard about LD 2003. We will do another session at some point, likely to talk about what that means for Auburn, but I think this is relevant because of the density conversation. So, want to do that?
I'm going to just, I want to add just a little bit about LD 2003. And I think it's an important takeaway that the planning board understands this. So no matter what, we're going to end up at 16 units per acre come July of 2023. I mean, that's state law. The rules aren't out, but state law, it's pretty clear there. I worked for the state for 10 years, and I can tell you that the AG's office is pretty clear on this. It's a bipartisan bill. It's supported by both sides of the legislature, and it's coming our way. I think that's really important to understand. The biggest takeaway here is at the end of the day, we're gonna have 16 units an acre, right? Come July of 2023. But what we don't do, if we don't pass our form-based code version, what happens, the biggest takeaway is we don't get to address 80% of the homes that are in this current zone. So 80% of the homes don't meet minimum lot size, they don't meet setback, they don't meet frontage. That's the big piece. We don't get to address that as a planning board and as professional planners if we don't do this. That's the most critical takeaway here. I think that's what we need to understand, is that this is coming our way. We can't stop it, and we should get in front of it. And this is a good way to address those, I call it square peg and a round hole. We built these homes in the 40s and 50s. We created the zoning in the 70s, 80s, and it was after the fact that these homes were built, 80% of the lots. If we looked at the lot analysis that our intern did, there's only about 9-10 lots that are really big and that could impose some of these larger developments. It's really those 80% that we're getting after. Form-based code has been around a long time. I went to graduate school at the Muskie School in the mid-2000s, and I can tell you that quality places, and I'll show a document to the planning board, I'll share it with you guys, that they were talking about this form-based code back in 2006, And they were recommending from the Brookings Institute that this was the most effective way to address our zoning issue that we have in the state of Maine with these towns that are built close to rivers, just like Auburn, in dense areas that don't meet the current zoning. So there may be some opposition about the onesie, twosie, big development, 3.5 stories, but we have a chance to really, as a planning board, and as professionals, we can set the units back. We can really create good buffers. I think this board does a fantastic job on that. And we need to still press those issues, create connectivity. We looked at the map that Catherine put together and that Evan put together on walkability. And we're striving, we have a transportation director now, we're striving for walkability in our neighborhoods. We need the densities to support that. We need the densities to support grants. Grants are, we need the densities there to support the grants that will bring more money to the community to slow the traffic down in Auburn. That's my biggest takeaway. I sit on Court Street and I shake my head and I see U-turns and I see people driving too fast in the downtown. And we've got to get money to Auburn. We got to make this more walkable. And this is part of that plan. This is part of the professional planning effort that we've been striving for, that the comprehensive plan identified. It also identified it again in 2010. And again, if we look at historical information that was provided by the Brookings Institute going back to 2006, it was suggesting these items. So I think that's an important takeaway, and I can't stress it enough as this is the greatest opportunity for this community to have.
I apologize for interrupting the staff report, but since we're on LD 2003, I would like some clarification, or rather understanding whether or not I am understanding this. So LD 2003 imposes by right an increased density. That I think we all understand. When we are discussing, correct me if I'm wrong, the difference between density that we are discussing with 4.2B and the density that would be required by law under LD 2003 is that the density allowed by 4.2B includes single-family market rate housing and, of course, low-income housing. The density required by LD 2003 allows only for increased density of low-income subsidized housing, but not market rate housing. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct.
Okay.
It's real clear in the text. There's a different provision in LD 2003 that looks at a percentage of, I think it's 102 or 140% above low to moderate income that allows even greater density than this that we're talking about.
Okay, and maybe that's where my confusion was,
Yep.
which is why I'm stopping to ask.
Yep.
So,
Nope. That's a good question.
LD 2003 is going to allow the same density, not allow, but require the same density for the same types of units we're discussing now, but would allow for an additional higher density by right, because by law, by right for low income, so that low income housing developments would be able to develop under a much higher density.
2.5 times.
Okay. Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood that distinction.
And just to be clear, and when we're talking about, when we're reaching the 16 units per acre, that's using the analysis of the UR, which is the urban residential, right, at 10,000 square feet per lot. So as Catherine showed, she broke up an existing vacant lot, broke it up into 2 lots at 10,000 square feet, and then put those 4 units in each of those lots. So as we break those lots up at 43,560 for an acre, you break them up at 10,000 square feet, we're getting there. We're at 16 units per acre. So I just want to be I want to make sure that the board is clear on that this is law, this is state law. It will be coming into effect July of 2023. I do know that DECD is currently going to be coming out with some rules. They're actually hiring 2 people right now, 2 two-year positions. And this is on their table in terms of addressing and really creating some clarity in the law and creating some guidance to make sure that the intent of the law is being met.
So my question on that, while we're talking about it, and just for the record, and I think everyone's understanding about this is, so, all right, so you're saying this is coming down the pike. This is what we can and will anticipate for, you said July of 2023. If we vote for 4-2B, which one trumps, 4-2B or LD 2003?
State law will trump, but what I was going for is that we don't get to address the nonconformity that's in these lots. So 80% of them, again, they don't meet the minimum size, lot size requirement. They don't meet setback requirement. They don't meet road frontage requirements. Again, these homes and I just walked through last week. I had a wonderful walk through on a road with some neighbors. They're beautiful neighborhoods. We want these neighborhoods to be preserved. We totally get that. It's not about taking land, it's just about preservation of those neighborhoods. And the development of the form-based code really allows that to happen. So if someone has the nice porches associated with these little cottage capes, if that gets to a point where 50% or more needs to be reconstructed, currently under the zoning, they can't do it. So this allows that opportunity to happen, to reinvest, as we saw with the picture with Catherine and the 4.2 existing, where they're really rebuilding that porch. They're creating opportunity for that homeowner to really brighten up the neighborhood. Everybody loves seeing new things with their neighbors, and it makes them feel good, and the houses look good, and it drives value up. Property values go up when they make these investments. I know that you guys understand this stuff. When you have a good neighborhood and you walk into that neighborhood and everything's taken care of because they can, that creates opportunity for the residents that live here.
Can I ask a clarifying question to make sure I understand? So your assertion is that LD 2003 will require this density by state law?
That's correct.
In
By
designated growth areas.
Okay.
Yep.
By adopting 4.2B, we would be in conformity with the state law, but the additional benefit of adopting 4.2B would be to take those 80% of houses out of nonconformance so that they are now conforming. Your assertion being that if we were to not adopt 4.2B and default to the state law, we would see the same density allowed. However, those 80% of homes would still remain non-conforming. I just want to make sure I'm very clear on what you're saying.
Yes, that is absolutely correct.
So they're overlaying one another.
Yep. Can I ask a question about rulemaking? This is something that has come up, and I'm going to ask you, John, because I know that you've worked at the state. I think as far as folks in the room, you are probably the most qualified to answer this question. When it comes to state law, we know that state law is adopted and then it goes through a rulemaking phase. Do the rules have to, how closely do the rules have to conform to the law? That is to say, must they conform to the intent of the law, or can they deviate such that we're not sure what the state would come up with?
It's been my experience over the, working with the AG's office. So I worked in the cross office building. I was on the 4th floor, and there's the 6th and 7th floor. And they're all attorneys up there, every one of them, the assistant general's office, the attorney general's office, and then they have assistant attorney generals. Every single one of them essentially is. And that I can tell you that they always look to the intent of the law. They always go back to that text, the original text that was signed and approved by the governor, and to make sure that that intent is fulfilled. And as the executive branch develops the guidelines and the guidance documents and the rules, they will be reviewing those to make sure that the intent of the law is being met.
So what's really in question is how the state might choose to implement this, not whether or not the state is going to move forward with this density,
Right.
essentially. Okay.
Yep.
I apologize for interrupting the staff report, but
These are good questions. And I also just want to highlight too that whether or not without LD 2003, this does still serve several benefits that we've talked about. And even if the state wasn't going in that direction, there are still lots of things that it can do for Auburn. But yes, the state is going in the direction of requiring more density, and there was also a traditional neighborhood development manual that was put out by the state in 2006 to encourage municipalities to go in this direction. So yeah, just to go a little bit further, these are the parcels right now by lot size that are non-conforming in Auburn. So this is only non-conforming by lot size. There are many more parcels that are not conforming by road frontage, and many houses, even more houses on these parcels, that are not conforming by setbacks. So this is just lot size here. So it shows parcels that are less than 10,000 square feet for single-family homes and parcels that are less than 12,000 square feet for two-family homes. That is the requirements within urban residential. Here are just some photo examples of non-conforming streets. So setbacks are another form of nonconformity. They impede progress on obtaining a permit. So you can't obtain a permit to change your house substantially if your house is not conforming to the zoning. Urban residence has a 25-foot front setback requirement. Many streets in the Court Street area do not meet these requirements. Summer, Winter, and Turner Streets all have 100% non-conformance, so therefore 0% conformance on the basis of front setbacks. So T-4.2b would bring all of these areas into conformity. Here's an image of what that looks like here. You can see 20 feet, 16 feet, 19 feet, all under 25, all non-conforming. So that's the staff report and or the presentation rather, and we'd be happy to answer any questions or go into any of this more or anything else that anybody can think of.
I got a couple questions. Hold this down. My first question was, I heard the 16 units per acre number a couple times this evening. Wasn't our recommendation to the city council that the 4.2B be 14 units per acre maximum?
we voted to remove density based on LD 2003. We felt that if we allowed 14 units per acre, LD 2003 would allow for 2.5 times that with low income. That was the vote of the board at the time.
Okay, and so another question, like back to the LD 2003, so that's to be applied to all growth areas, but the 2.5 times that density would be for low-income housing. So is there an area in Auburn that could be targeted for that and then potentially be 40 units per acre in this zone? If it's 16 right now, it's 2.5. So say a section of that James Street neighborhood gets bought up, and would there be a potential opportunity for 40 units per acre under that?
Potentially they could be, but, you know, again, we've talked about economics before, but tearing down neighborhoods and rebuilding is really not going to be feasible in terms from an economic and return on investment, regardless if it's low to moderate income housing or if it's market rate housing. I don't think that's going to be supported. As we saw in the economic analysis for homes, a entry level home is, you know, $267,000, and a newly built home, and we're talking no garage here on the newly built home, is upwards to $318,000 just for a single family. When you talk about multifamilies with, you know, say 12 units or more, that's going to be very difficult to get to that density. The other part of a form-based code, and I'm glad you brought this up, Riley, in that the ordinances that the city will have in place, the setback requirements will still need to be met. So if we're still in the UR, that will still have to be met. The parking requirement will still have to be met. And then the height restriction will still have to be met. So all those items will limit development in those areas. So I think that's a good point that you brought up.
So just a quick question off of
Can I
that.
finish mine?
It's actually off of what he's.
Same.
Okay, go ahead.
So the density would be able to be trumped by LD 2003, but the height restriction would not be able to be trumped by LD 2003.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries, sorry about that. So my only question for you, and not that I want to go into this exercise over again, but I really appreciate that quantitative data that you gave around, you know, the percentages of what can be built and the units and the density. My only question or comment for you, Riley, is I do wonder, and not that I would want to have you guys do this exercise again, but when you're looking at 42B and LD 2003, I do wonder if that data could overlay each other a little bit, right? Like, so if you're looking at the unit and the housing and the density, I just wonder if you can use some of that data for the LD 2003 too, just to help alleviate some of the concerns that I feel like you might have had.
I think the concern comes from identifying density. We keep talking about 16 units per acre, so I think clarification there is required. T42B has no density maximum. However, our ordinance does not allow a development to occur that is incongruent with the comprehensive plan. And the comprehensive plan describes a density not to exceed 16 units per acre. And this is where LD 2003 becomes interesting, because we do not have a prescribed density within that ordinance should we choose to adopt it. However, a developer cannot exceed the density or do something that is incongruent with the comprehensive plan. So essentially, LD 2003, with regard to low income housing, means that there is a prescribed density of not, and 2.5 times not is not. However, LD 2003, as staff has pointed out, allows for additional housing of market rate housing, and that's where you see that density. But I think that it becomes an interesting question, the reality being that you cannot multiply a number that does not exist within the ordinance, but the 16 units per acre that we're discussing is a number that limits development, not because it is in the ordinance, but because our ordinance dictates that you cannot develop outside of the scope of the comprehensive plan. And this is something that we saw actually, none of the members that are here were here when this happened, but this is something that actually happened when we looked at the Woodbury Heights development. I don't know if folks are familiar with that. off of Old Danville Road, the houses that were built out there. But that was something that came up then as well.
Interesting enough, just to add to the conversation, LD 2003 specifically references the approval of the comprehensive plan. So in that, we can go back to that and tie that to LD 2003 as we review it as staff, and then as you guys review it as the planning board, we can make sure we tie it back to that 16 units per acre. But really, that's for the larger developments. The smaller developments is really the form, right? So that's where the form really takes over when we look at building density in terms of building footprint on a lot, required parking space, required parking for each unit, and then additional parking beyond, say 4 units, you need an additional parking spot. We look at all those things and we start putting the building blocks together, and that's really our controls of the development of those smaller lots. So I think that's important to note. In comparison, when we talk about height restrictions, specifically in the UR, where it's 35 feet, right? So, and we need to understand that 35 feet, they can certainly get 3 stories in those smaller lots at 35 feet. We've got the flat decker homes that we're very familiar with here in Auburn and in Lewiston and Biddeford and Waterville, Bangor. You can just go right down through and think about these communities along the river systems, and they have these style of homes, and those particular ones, even in the UR, would work at 35 feet. So that's just a note.
The other questions I had were actually more procedural and not specific to the zone, but we mentioned the comp plan and when it was adopted. But is there any update as to when our comp plan hasn't technically been adopted, correct?
Yeah, so I reached out to Tom today. I sent him an email yesterday, and I went back to the notes. The plan itself was supposed to be approved essentially 2 months ago tomorrow. So July 15th was their jurisdictional date where they were supposed to have their findings of fact. He was very clear. At the time, Tom was a I don't know if they call it a division. There must be a division there at ACF. He was a division of 1. There's typically a division of 5. So essentially he was down staff. And he ultimately said, there's no way. He was just point blank and said, we're not going to meet that deadline. I again followed up today with a phone call, no answer, email. I got crickets, unfortunately. But they're busy. They've got 3 or 4 times more than they normally see, and the workload's just great. I think other communities are maybe trying to get ahead of some of this stuff and are up against the same thing the City of Auburn is.
Other questions? So, at the beginning of the staff presentation, we heard that the discussion of 4.2 be in conjunction with 4.2 within this area is about a year old. I guess, and again, I'm going to be the only person up front that was here when this happened, including staff. I predate staff on this one. When we began the process for form-based zoning in 2013, 2014, partly through 2015, it's on the public record. The intent was actually to go into this neighborhood. The reason that it was not adopted as far as the planning board had wished it would be at the time was essentially a calculated decision. We had previously attempted to create and propose adoption of a new zone. with the previous council, and they had told us that it was ironically not our place to do so, which I sort of took objection to. However, when we developed the form-based code, the intent was for this to extend into these neighborhoods. The planning board at the time chose not to do that and included only a very small section of downtown with a recommendation that additional areas be added to the form-based code as time went on, simply because the planning board felt so strongly in form-based code that we wanted to see it adopted, at least in part, rather than be rejected in whole, because the council felt we were biting off more than we could chew. I want to add that piece of legacy information to the discussion because I want people to understand that discussion of form-based code did not begin a year ago, and discussion of form-based code in this neighborhood did not begin a year ago. And I think it's important, it is important to note that the year and a half long process that the planning board went through to develop and implement form-based code in the beginning included these areas of the city. So this is not like a new thing. And I'm sure I will upset some people by saying this, but that's the reality. And I think it's important that we recognize the legacy beyond what just we're talking about now, that this process began even prior to the current comprehensive plan update. Okay, so, and I will stop talking about that, but I just think it's important for people to recognize that this is not new. Are there other questions? I apologize, that was not really a question. All right. We have no applicant, so at this point we would move to public comment section of the hearing. At this time, I would entertain a motion to open the public comment section of the hearing.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Before we invite members of the public to speak, I'll remind everyone of the policies with regard to public comment for the planning board. We ask that you limit your comments to 5 minutes and that you limit your comments to the current public hearing that is to be on topic, specifically in this case with 4.2B, or if you wish to speak on 4.2B within the Court Street neighborhood, that is also certainly allowable because that is part of this hearing. It is generally not the planning board's policy to answer questions. However, you will notice as you're speaking that members of the planning board will write down questions and concerns, and we'll make sure that we bring those up when we begin the debate portion of the hearing. Having said that, at this point, members of the public are welcome to come forward. I will make sure that I time you. I will, if I do this, I'm not pointing at you or asking you to stop. I'm letting you know that there's 1 minute left, so that way you can compose your comments appropriately. And please begin by stating your name and address.
Hello, my name's Ryan Smith. I live at 14 Weaver Street here in Auburn. I just wanted to, I didn't plan on talking about this. I wanted to correct a couple of things about LD 2003 in the comments I just heard, and I think it's a little misunderstood. So first of all, this actually was not bipartisan. I actually just looked it up. It got 77% of Democrat votes, 64 out of 83 Democrats voted for it. Only 4 out of 64 Republicans did, which is 6%. It's not very bipartisan in my definition of that. And I'll say LD 2003 is really disastrous enough, and I really think that 4.2B, you don't need this to be in compliance with LD 2003. You can just make one adjustment to this zone, and that is to allow 4-unit buildings, 4 units in one building. If you just did that, you would be in compliance with LD 2003. because then you would have to allow 4 units per parcel. Everything else, we're already adopted too, like the accessory dwelling unit. We already have an ordinance on that. We're already in compliance. And then the 2.5 times multiplier just automatically comes into effect. So in my definition, it'd be like the Red Sox playing the Yankees at their stadium and hitting a home run. Well, that would be LD 2003. Well, if the Yankees were up to bat and they hit it all the way back to New York to their stadium, that would be T 4.2B. This is way above and beyond what LD 2003 requires. So I just wanted to just let you guys know that first of all. But then I'm going to go on to the rest of my plan comments, which is comments on process and motives. So these amendments did not come from community input. It's still lacking. And, I'm told by at least one member of the planning board, they don't listen to public input at these meetings. So as the community hears that, and then there were 2 community meetings held by the mayor and 2 city councilors, no one here that's supposed to be doing the planning. And there were no amendments that came out of those meetings. No concerns were heard whatsoever. There should be more community meetings with everyone that's going to be affected by this and legitimate feedback be taken. But again, no amendments from those meetings, and the density actually went up. So originally we went from 16 to 14, and then we completely removed density. So I don't know how our concerns were heard. So my question is, how can the community have their voice heard when this seems like a rigged system? And I feel like we're rushing again. So when we did 4.2, we told you the entire time you were rushing. And then a meeting right after that, we had a staff member say we should redo this before we petitioned it out because there are allowed uses in 4.2 that we don't want in this neighborhood. And I thought, wow, where have I heard that before? The community. And we're just doing it again because I'm saying it again. We're rushing it. There are still allowed uses that we need to rethink, and we're saying the same exact stuff over again this time. Now, on to my second part, that was process. Now I'm on to motives. So this actually came from one comment from city staff. So I called in to actually talk about something completely different because I do some transactions. I was asking about a property I own, and the staff member changed the subject to this. All right, fine, I'll have that discussion with you. Well, I recommended more engagement, and then one of my recommendations was just to strip zone Court Street. Leave the neighborhoods urban residential, make that first parcel on Court Street this, right? It's just one of the many ideas I was offering up. But I was told we can't do that because we have specific individuals who want to develop their parcels who are not the first parcel on Court Street. And I didn't think of anything of it at the time, but that was on a Friday, and I had the weekend to think about it, and I thought, maybe that is what this is about. There are specific individuals who want to develop their parcels that we're developing the zoning for. Because we could solve nonconformity really easily. Like in Mechanic Falls, where I enforce code, we have an ordinance that says you can rebuild in 3 years. You have 3 years to rebuild. Okay, what's so hard about passing an ordinance about that? Or just taking urban residential and removing setbacks and road frontage requirements. I mean, then there you have it, conformity. And so I don't understand why we have to go this far, hitting a home run from Boston to New York just to get that. But I also want to talk about legal versus proper. So it seems like the process that's being taken to me, from my perspective, is what can we get away with? And that's not the proper way to do this. You know, you can govern the law. It doesn't say it's illegal, but it also doesn't say specifically that it is legal. So I will say, though, however, I'm calling into question 4.2b, the legality of it, because cities have done this before and been sued and lost. They implemented zoning, citizens petition it out, they change it slightly, and then they re-implement it and get sued. So actually, I would say that is illegal. But I guess what I'm really trying to say is I'm just extremely disappointed in the city of Auburn and the process we've taken, and I wish I could be involved in the proper process instead of having to come here, do this, petition it out, and do that over and over again. So I just hope that you all can start feeling the same way as me. Thank you.
Thank you. That was good, Mr. Smith. You were down to the second.
My name is Dean Bailey. I live at 34 Fern Street in Auburn. When my wife and I moved here 40 years ago, we specifically chose a dense neighborhood. And any of you know the Fern and Johnson Street area know it's a very dense neighborhood because we wanted a neighborhood, all right? And we wanted that for our son and for our grandchildren, which has been great. My concern, and maybe I'm off base here, and if I am, you tell me, is the impact impact this will have. Okay, my concern is the impact this will have on the property tax. Auburn's property tax is 15% higher than Portland, 20% higher than South Portland, 20% higher than Brunswick. And, you know, we're one of the highest property tax cities in the state. And if you increase the density, you're certainly going to increase the revenue to the city. And there's no way you can increase the density without increasing the revenue, maybe by substantial amounts of money, I don't know. But the point is, I would hope the city and this planning board would consider reducing the property tax proportionally by the revenue that's been increased. And I'm sure somebody in the finance department has taken the time to do a projection about how much additional revenue will be coming in 5 years, 10 years, and so forth. If they can't do it, I certainly can, and I have a master's in public finance. So the point being is our taxes are very high, and we need to find a way to lower them. And if we're increasing the density, we're increasing the revenue, what can we do about that?
Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Jeffrey Harmon. I live at 34 Vista Drive in Auburn. I guess first I'd like to say that I certainly think we should have growth in the city. Form-based codes are clearly the way to go. But as staff said tonight, we need to have a professional planning process. And the problem is that's not what's going on. You'll notice in the staff paper there's a number of nationally recognized organizations around zoning. There's some other ones: Form-Based Code Institute, Congress for New Urbanism, Center for Applied Transit Studies, National SRED Institute, Grow Smart Maine. Every single one of those organizations, when they talk about form-based code, in some way describes a collaborative community process to develop a shared vision for the zoning within the city. They all also talk about not having a broad-based approach, and you need a one-size-fits-all. It needs to be at a more granular level. What's happening here is you're cramming all this into the adoption process. The adoption process is fine, limiting people to 5 minutes here and 3 minutes at the city council, as an adoption process, a legal process, and you're limiting people to that absolute minimum legal participation. What's described by all these groups is community engagement in the development and in the application that then comes back to an adoption process like this. The city ordinances recognize the need for this planning board to step outside of this adoption process, and Section 2-476 specifically talks about the chair's ability to set up committees to do more detailed work to report back to the planning board. Let's talk about how we actually got to this. The chair was talking about prior attempts relative to this zone. That's true. Those attempts couldn't succeed because they were in violation of the comprehensive plan. So then a process was started to review the comprehensive plan, right? That was a process. The sole jurisdiction under the ordinance, under Section 2-475, sits with this body, not the city council. But the city council is the body that started and ran that process. And let's talk about how the land use portion was developed. There were 3 people involved: the mayor and one city councilor and 1 planning board member. No public participation in any way. The 3 people was staff. They had 5 meetings. Only one of those meetings was noted on the city calendar. There was no notice to anybody about the other 4. No minutes was taken of any of these meetings. 2 of them were recorded. There were then 3 community presentations. 1 of those was recorded. And the city's notes that they've provided and the survey that they did, it's very clear in there that almost all of the comments were either negative or opposed to the planned change. Those changes came to this body. You spent exactly 1 hour and 5 minutes reviewing that comprehensive plan over 2 meetings. A substantive portion of that was a big discussion about the process and how you were going to do this. Mr. Du Bois noted at that meeting that he was frustrated because he couldn't understand why it had to be passed that night with limited public input. But it was passed that night and sent on to the city council. We then went down the road, we had the 4.2. People pushed back on that. We ran into 4.2B. The mayor, 2 councilors, with no public participation in the meeting, developed that standard. When it came back to you, Chairman Sear instructed you, it was an up or down vote. Eric Cousins said at the time the planning department hadn't done any substantive planning because it came from the city council and you were only asked to recommend it or not. No planning took place. So here we are, we're going to create 4.2B. You're planning on applying it to the Court Street zone. The city council's already published an accelerated schedule to apply this to across 5,500 acres of the city. One broad brush fits all, no substantive public participation. And I would then say that you should engage in a professional planning process, use the public charrettes, which are stakeholder engagement, members of the planning board, members of the staff, members of the community, developers, and create a shared vision. Because you do not have public support for what you're doing. The majority of people we've seen have spoken against this. They petitioned against this. If you want public engagement,
Thank you,
need
Mr.
to engage
Hammond.
the public. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who wishes to address the board?
Scott Berry, 179 Davis Avenue. I'd like to ask the board, could I hand this out to the board so they can follow me?
Yes, I'll pause time so you can. Can you please, though, for the members of the public, explain what it is that you're handing to us, and if possible, if you have any extras, please.
A generic building with a huge sign in a residential neighborhood. It's not what they had up here.
I pause your time, but wait one moment, so that way.
But before I get to that, I'm here in favor of what's going on. I'm glad somebody articulated 2003, LD 2003 to everybody. We have a chance, and I don't want to lose that chance. I'm glad you articulated that. This will end exclusionary zoning, which will ultimately end racial discrimination in the housing market. And we still have housing discrimination in the Aggie zone with that you have to work a percentage of that land, make an income on, but that's why blacks do not apply, or Irish do not apply to buy this land. Unless you're a wealthy landowner, there's no other land and what you're doing here to do. What we're doing now will help open up entrepreneurship to many who were locked out of elevating themselves to a higher standard of living for themselves and their families for what you're doing. With the zoning change, a single mom could open a business in her home to help raise her family. A family that is just living a little above the poverty level could open a business in their home to lift their way above the poverty level. A senior who is on a limited income that owned their own home could also start a small business to help ends meet. You can bring your loved ones, your in-laws, if they need be, or a special needs person. You can have them in your home. You could add something onto it. It's all a plus. The leaders of this community must be mindful for not devaluing property while considering this zoning change. And this is where I'm going to right here. This business fit in to a residential neighborhood, and it's in where you're going to have businesses. Now they remodeled, they put these big, huge signs. And I was here when the planning staff said, we only told you we do 2x2 signs. Does that look like a 2x2 sign? There's another sign on the other side of the building that illuminates across the street into somebody else's window. Does that look like a 2x2 sign that they told you? You can do this a different way. And again, they put this up, they put a nice little business up here that blended in with the community. The neighborhoods need something to blend in. You go to, I go to Pennsylvania 4 or 5 times. I go to Peddler's Village. It's called Peddler's Village. It's a unique place. They got small houses and they're all business. You wouldn't know they're there. They do a tremendous business. They got small signs. They don't have anything that's lit that stands out. Same with Kettle's Village. That's run by the Mennonites. There's small buildings, small homes. They even got a manufacturing of jams and jellies there. You can do this right, but you have to do it right without devaluating people's property. I sell real estate, and it would be hard for me to sell a house across the street versus one that doesn't have a store next to them. You don't want your property to be devalued, and nobody else does either. I thank you for your time, and you're doing a great job.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that wishes to address the board on this topic?
My name is Elizabeth Dunn. I live at 530 Court Street. I did prepare a few things, but I had a couple comments in addition, things that I heard this evening. It may be true for all of you that you've been at this for a while, but my first notice came at the beginning of the year with this zoning change that was going to affect my neighborhood. So that was my first opportunity to tune in and pay attention. I have to say that the comp plan and the strategic plan and all the other things that have been talked about over and over, I never got any kind of notification or postcard or letter saying, gee, hey, we need you. I would have been there. Also, the pictures that you keep showing about the zoned areas that meet the 16 or higher density, they're all great pictures and they're all true. However, they're all specifically located in a certain part of Court Street from Park Avenue down. So where I live is from Park Avenue the other way, on the other side of the hill towards Minot Avenue. So I would wonder what the density would be on my end, or if you go on Outer Lake Street, if you go up Vista Drive, or Pinnacle, or Briarcliff Knoll, or Amberley Way, or Longbow Court, or any of those other developments off of Court Street the other way, I can guarantee the density is going to be a lot less. And so there is a discrepancy in trying to put all of this into one big zone when there are such differences. Like my particular lot, it's like probably a quarter unit per acre. Anyway, enough said that some of the pictures don't really fairly represent all of the outside areas of our community. So here are my prepared notes. Since January, I have heard over and over that one of our purposes of rezoning is to make properties more conforming. Seems like a good idea. Also said that some of our problems are that with our old ordinance that homeowners can't make the desired improvements to their home, like their porches and their decks and their ramps and the additions that they need for people and their families that have special needs. And I think that's all something we need to do. It's important, and there shouldn't be a negative to that. However, it seems to me that some of those problems could be handled differently with addressing setbacks and specific needs for those residents. The problem of conformity, though, you're not fixing the problem of conformity in this case. The problem is simply going to be transferred to other people. Like, as soon as this passes, my home is now non-conforming. So what happens when I have to replace it? Who's going to help me? Who's going to guarantee that I can put my house back where I want it on my property? I wonder about that. Has anyone completed a study of how many homes would be non-conforming with the new ordinance? And what are we going to do to address that? Because I haven't heard anything. Yes, 80% are non-conforming now. So does that mean 20% are non-conforming later, but we don't matter? I wonder what we're going to do to address that. Okay, so from where I sit, it seems that rezoning is not so much about conformity as it is about encouraging large-scale development in as many cases as we can find. I only have to look across the street to see what has been envisioned by this board and the city council. Court Street will never be the same. The addition of Stable Bridge has not been viewed as an enhancement by most in the community that I've spoken to. I continue to receive phone calls from people expressing their sympathies about the construction happening. Nor does this development satisfy the need for more affordable housing in our area. If you go onto their website, which is clearly advertised all over the street, the market rate rent is listed at $1,800 and more per month. With our average family income, as we were talking about earlier, who can afford that? Where are they going to find housing that's more affordable? I would remind you too that the 4.2 was not very well taken by the public, and the amendments that have been made to create this 4.2B are really minimally different. I've talked about this before, I won't go into details. It is likely that our rezoning efforts in Auburn would be way more successful if you would listen to many that have spoken and really allow the citizens to have the time to feel that we are seriously heard when we speak to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else that wishes to address the board?
Bob Hayes, 172 Allen Avenue here in Auburn. The planning board as a whole, and board members as individuals, should be feeling a hard slap to the face with the mayor's scheduling first reading ahead of considerations and recommendations from the planning board. Because I served on the planning board for 10 years, and served as a council for more than 10 years, I was asked if I could recall a similar scheduling. After some thought, I answered no. I could not recall a mayor not respecting the importance and responsibilities of the planning board and the board's independent thoughts, shared, considered, discussed, and prepared for public and council presentation. Planning in general, and more specifically form-based codes, take time and are the responsibilities of the planning board. Unfortunately, the public continues to witness a flawed top-down process, not allowing the planning board to properly and adequately reach out and engage the public. Might the planning board surprise the mayor and council by advancing its own schedule that would allow
Bob, I'm
public
sorry to
engagement?
interrupt. They can't hear you. You've got to make sure you talk into the mic. I'm sorry.
Should I start again? If I have some more time, I'll.
I paused your time as soon as Mr. Blaze started speaking, so go ahead and continue, but I would say, I'll give you maybe like a 10, 15 second lag to make sure that the mic's picking you up before you start your time again.
Thank you. Might the planning board surprise the mayor and council by advancing its own schedule that would allow and promote public engagement within a definable neighborhood? Might the planning board actually build codes reflective of neighborhood characteristics that are desirable and that should be enhanced and complemented? Might the planning board introduce shades of purple before proceeding with a forecasted dark purple shading not only over 1,600 acres of so-called urban land, but nearly, I guess I've been corrected, 5,500 acres of urban as well as suburban and even rural land. I guess my last thought was to just suggest haste makes waste. But I guess, how much more time do I have?
You have just shy of 3 minutes.
Okay, I guess, and I appreciate the chair reminding us that this process started back in 2013, 14, 15. And yes, codes were developed, but the codes were really focused to the downtown. And we've renamed this code, but it is still a downtown code. And yes, I think, Mr. Sear, you're correct. I think there was envisioned that form-based codes should be developed for specific neighborhoods. And even you suggested before this board, suggesting to the board that maybe we should consider some other codes possible. So let's find some other shades of purple. This 1,600 acres is not one neighborhood. It represents several neighborhoods, truly definable. I think going up Court Street, as has been suggested, when you reach the top of the hill, there's quite a division. Going across Park Avenue, there's quite a difference between inner and outer Lake Street. So we're doing an injustice to this community by defining or recognizing 1,600 acres as one neighborhood and foreseeing that we're actually going to 5,500 acres as one neighborhood. And the one code, and I don't think it was mentioned, 4.1 is part of the list. And it seems to be ignored. In 4.2, we've been trying to get closer and closer to 4.1. But why not consider 4.1? And I think there's probably some other codes that should be developed. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak?
My name is Nancy Green. I live at 134 Granite Street. I'm basically here just to support the people that have already spoken. I have been very, very disappointed with the process that has gone on with this zoning change and these amazing changes that are going to make, that are going to change, that are going to affect our community. I have been one of the people that have, that has passed around a petition. Mainly, I've passed it around not to stop the process, but to get the process going so we can actually talk. I think it was very good to know from the speaker earlier that it was not a bipartisan vote in the State House. And that is very important. I think it is, now I feel it's being rushed. We've got to do it because it's all going to happen next July, no matter what. And we have yet, as a community, come together and talked about this. Last summer, I saw in the newspaper a little blurb saying that the comprehensive plan was going to be discussed. And I said, oh, okay, I'll go down there. And I was at the Seniors Center in Auburn. And it was discussed and it was put up on the board. There were a lot of people there. And I raised my hand and I said, I didn't quite get this for the Lake Street area, which is where I'm from. And I in a very nice way, I tried to get some clarity on it. And the mayor told me I was being elitist. And so I really don't consider the conversation around that a process-oriented type of thing. The final thing I have is I continue to be very concerned about traffic on Court Street. And yet, and people have also talked about the traffic on Western Ave. Every time my husband and I go down Western Avenue, we almost hit cars because there are two lines and then people are allowed to park as well, and there is just simply not enough room there. I don't know how your planning takes that into account, but I don't hear anything about traffic really. So anyway, I am sorry about the process. I am sorry that you who are working hard and are part of our community, and our mayor and our city is just not, and our city councilors are not willing to open up our discussion.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak?
Good evening. My name is John Cleveland. I live at 183 Davis Avenue in Auburn. I'd like to use a few precious minutes that I get here to comment on the process of this amendment, the zoning amendments, and the role of the planning board. In particular, I'd like to speak to the fact of the backwards process here that we're using, that is that the public hearing for the planning board this evening has taken place after the city council has already voted on the first reading and has already had a public hearing on September the 6th on these particular amendments. This is unprecedented in the city of Auburn. Let me perhaps give you a little historical background. I've been here a while and have gone through a lot of these processes. I served for 8 years on the city council and as mayor starting in 1977. In that period of time, we also updated the comprehensive plan. We also had a whole new set of zoning ordinances gone through, and in fact, the planning board took many months to develop those. And in that entire period, never once did the city council ever take any action before the planning board had a chance to do their full job, had a chance to have a public hearing, had a chance to hear from the public, and had a chance to take those into consideration. You are now in the position where, if you make any changes, what the city council has already done is null and void, because it's not consistent with your recommendation, so they put you in a very awkward space. I don't remember since 1977, and I've lived here the whole time, almost 50 years now, a single incident where the city council acted on zoning ordinances before the planning board had their public hearing and made a recommendation. Almost 50 years. I don't have any recollection. I talked to my colleague Bob Hayes. He has no recollection of it either. This is completely unprecedented. So I think the question here is really not, does the state law, the charter, and the Auburn ordinances is permitted? In other words, the question here is not, does the state law and any of the ordinances prohibit it? The question really is, do any of those things permit it? If you take a look at the state law, there is no language in there that says it permits this process. If you look at the city charter, there is no language in there that says it permits this kind of a particular process. I happen to have been on that charter commission, and I know that we didn't put the language in there. Even if we had the opportunity to do that, and we chose not to do it. We made it clear what the process should be, and the city ordinances are the same way. There's nothing in your city ordinances that says, notwithstanding the memorandum, that this is permitted. Now, I also had the opportunity to serve about 10 years in the state senate, and I chaired many committees at that time, so I worked very closely with the attorneys, both in the policy and legal analysis division, as well as in the revisers of statute, about how these professionals crafted law. Several times the question came up, and I asked the question, what if we need to prohibit something in any of those laws so that they don't happen? And they all said, no, you don't do it that way. The laws work by saying that the people who make them, either at the local or state level, have the opportunity to put in the law the directions that they want. If they don't have to put in what they don't want, because they're only permitted to do what is in those statutes and language. So it is completely unprecedented that we're following this process, and very concerning. Now, it's concerning because it really doesn't provide the public with the opportunity for input, because this whole process has been accelerated to go forward. There's already a schedule put out, public information, that they're going to be not only this, but a series of other amendments are going to come before you. And it looks as though the same process. Do the first reading, have a public hearing, come back to you, next city council meeting, have it passed in a matter of less than 2 weeks on all of those actions. So,
I apologize, Mr. Cleveland, your time is up.
thank you.
Robert Daigle, I 72 Lake Auburn Avenue. First of all, I agree with John about I think the city council put the cart before the horse and having their vote before. And I question why the first statement came out from the gentleman over here, that he got a letter from the attorney to state that it was legal. Who asked for that? My question.
Normally we don't. Okay, so normally we do not answer questions.
I know, I mean, that's.
I will
I'm
answer
not
that
asking-
question. I'll answer that question directly.
Okay.
I met with staff previous to the meeting. I specifically asked for that.
Okay. Because it just seems like it was, I mean, when we got the list of all the procedures for these hearings, and we saw that the city voted, and then now we have the planning board, it was like, even my wife said, how come? The planning board should be meeting first. And when the people here said, that's not the way we've been doing things in the past. This seems like a whole new process of doing things because they want to rush things forward. My biggest concern is I want to protect my neighborhood. I want to protect the environment of Auburn. That's what I want to do. You know, my first residence in Auburn as an adult was a two-family home. I chose to live in a two-family home. And I chose to have a neighbor up above me. Later on, I had a single-family home. I live in a single-family neighborhood. I don't want somebody putting up an apartment building across the street from me, or right next door to me, or adding on an adult apartment. And then 2 years from now, after the mother dies, sell it, and now you have another lot that's not even big enough to have kids. You know, and then 16 houses. I hear parking spaces. But what about the areas for the kids to play? What about the green land? I haven't heard anything on the acreage of how much has to be left for kids to play. You want density? Go to Knox Street, watch, see where the kids are playing. They're playing in the street. You know, that's, if you want that for Auburn, keep it in your neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak?
My name is Pam Rousseau, 745 West Auburn Road. First of all, I want to say thank you when you were on the planning board before that you didn't put this city core ordinance all the way out to Court Street, Lake Street, and Park Street back then. Your vision, or the mayor's vision, or the city council's vision of Auburn isn't the vision of most of the citizens. T24B is just expanding the city core. If you go out, that's a lot of different, it was mentioned before, below Park Street, above Park Street, Lake Street, Park. Eric Cousins has said, sitting right there, that those are rural areas. So there is not much difference between T24 and T24B. And I went and listened to this. I think I told you guys this already. It took me 2 or 3 times because everything is so quiet on the YouTube. It's not substantially different. All you have to do with the T24 is you just had to get permission. And now it's carte blanche. And you don't have pot stores. Thank you very much. And they had to change, as Eric Cousins says, they had to change that for the setbacks because the places that are too rural don't meet those setbacks. We are not a one-size-fits-all. Get it through your heads. We are not a one-size-fits-all. And if somebody, and then it was also mentioned that with Eric, he says, well, it gives us too much work to do if people just come in and ask for what do they call it when you have to ask a special permission? And he said, oh, that gives us too much work to do. It's too much of a burden for the staff. Too bad. If somebody wants to go before the board and get a variance or whatever you call it, then do so. But that's not fair to everybody else. When I bought on Hotel Road in Lake Street, I probably had 10 cars go by me a day. Not a year. That would have even been better. Okay, I built there for a purpose. When you put conforming, why are they unconforming now? Because they've widened the streets? Is the city of Auburn the reason why those 80% of the houses aren't conforming? Okay, why can't they get a grandfather clause? They do that in many other cities. Why does all this have to go through just because it's going to put too much burden on the staff? Let's just go, and it doesn't make sense. Hold on, I took a bunch of notes. And I really ask that you spent over an hour listening to these two people from the city staff, and, I can see it, I'm sure you like everything that you may or may not like everything they said. I hope you don't. And then we only get 5 minutes. And I've even applied to the planning board. I didn't get in. I wonder why. So I'm just saying, please listen to us. And please know that we are not a one-size-fits-all. If I don't get to these meetings because I can't, I listen to them on YouTube. But please, please listen to us. You don't have to listen to the city council. You don't have to listen to the mayor. Okay, so please.
No, you have 1 minute left is what I'm saying.
You know what? I don't have to take up all my time as long as I've said what I had to say.
Okay, thank you, Pam. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak? All right, seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to close the public input section of the hearing.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. All those in favor? Well, I guess there were some comments made. I'm realizing I did not disclose this at the beginning, but everyone should be aware that I live in this neighborhood, right? So I live on Grandis Street. So that people know. I also live in a non-conforming lot, and there was a question as to why these homes are now non-conforming. My home is non-conforming because it was built in 1932. It was built to 1932 standards, at which time there were no ordinances for residential development in the city of Auburn. That is to say, my house and many of the houses next to me were built in the absence of residential zoning. The residential zoning that we know of, or that we would recognize today, wasn't implemented until the 1960s in Auburn. And at that time, it was decided that the small lots and houses and neighborhoods that were predominant in the early decades were no longer desirable, and that we wanted larger lots, quarter-acre lots with rooms for garages and cars and all of those things that kind of sort of came post-World War II. And with the baby boomers, and I'm making no comment as to whether that is good or bad, but the question was asked, and I can tell you specifically, for instance, my house, that is why it is non-conforming. But it is important that before I continue this discussion, people recognize that, yes, I do live in this neighborhood. Having said that, is there anyone else that, yeah, Mr. Bergeron?
I'm sorry. I thought you were asking if there's anyone else that lives in this neighborhood.
Oh, no, I was going to say, is there anyone else that is realizing that they should be disclosing anything at this point?
Yes, I do. Geez, I'm sorry. I just wanted to disclose that I bought a property on 431 Turner Street, and it is a commercial residential. So before I have voting power, I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew that I did buy this property last Friday.
Anyone else?
I also live in the designated area as well, on Fairview Avenue.
Okay.
As well, I live on Blackmer Street, so this would come to the neighborhood as well.
And I know, Mr. Bergeron, you indicated you live, I know because he lives right around the corner from me. So having said that, Are there any members of the planning board that would want to raise an objection to any individuals who've disclosed anything moving forward? Seeing none, I'm going to take that as unanimous consent that we believe this is all good and proper. So, having said that, before we begin deliberations, as is our normal process, I would entertain folks asking questions that they believe were raised during public comment.
Could staff address why the last question by Mrs. Russo, why those non-conforming houses couldn't be grandfathered in?
Currently, right now, our ordinance doesn't allow that. I'm not aware of a variance process to allow those pieces to happen. We get probably 3 or 4 inquiries a week. We'd probably inundate the planning board if we had to bring every one of those to the planning board to be addressed. That wouldn't be feasible. Certainly, there could be a text change suggested that that is clear, that allows the nonconformity to become conforming. But that has to go through it really needs to go through be supported by the comprehensive plan, and then go through that process, and then again be sponsored by the council and recommended by the planning board. So there would be a long process for that to get the text actually changed. So.
Yeah, I've got a whole list if people don't ask, so. By all means, Mr. DuBois.
Could we talk about the idea that there's 80% non-conforming today? Would this, in any way, shape, or form, create any non-conforming properties after this passes? Should it pass?
Yeah, I think there would be some onesie twosies out there, certainly. But as we talk through this, we added a provision for roadways and parking setbacks. So if we took a very liberal interpretation of that, if we looked at form-based code as we made the amendments originally for parking and for roadways, or access ways rather, I think we could establish setbacks in those houses that are really set back further. In new developments, we would really look for if the homes were set further back, and there's additional language in the ordinance that basically, if we look at either side of the lot, we can suggest that they marry that, and those may be further back.
That's in the current revision in front of us, though.
That's correct.
Stating that. Okay.
That is correct. We could establish, as a board and as staff, we've talked through some of this stuff with potential development in the areas, specifically in 4.2 along the river. We're not in this particular zone, but we're suggesting that to meet the setback requirements, that they put walkways and pedestrian walkways that connect to the roadway. So we create that connectivity for those smaller lots. Obviously, for the bigger lots, and a person has, say, a 5-acre lot and their home is way back, we're not suggesting that they put in a walkway to the roadway for that. But we could look at their access way and their parking, where their parking lot is associated with their home. We could associate that as the adjacency and to meet the form-based code.
Can I ask a follow-up on that real quick, specific to this? Mrs. Dunn, I hope you don't think this is improper, and I'll ask you first. You asked about your specific lot, and I would like to ask about your specific lot. If you would like me not to, I won't. Right. No, I asked because you had asked about your specific, so, it's an interesting case in that it's a back lot, so it's behind. Yep, yep. So, in looking at that lot, I know that I guess my question is that a lot that was created under the ordinance that allowed for back lots that we then repealed, or is that a lot that would be, like, is it conforming right now is the question, right? That's my question. Right, because that's going to be pertinent to the question, right? Like, what happens to the lot? Right, and things have changed now, so I'm wondering, like, those houses that were built, like,
Yeah,
are they still conforming, or did they become non-conforming when we stopped the backlot thing, or?
Yeah, so those became non-conforming because it doesn't have the road frontage, but I don't know the lot exactly, so I don't know if this one does not have the required road frontage.
You need to be.
Is there a house number?
Mrs. Dunn is not joking when she's saying she's across from 555 Court Street. So you need to go like 255 Court Street because that's.
Type in 530 Court.
You're on Vista. You need to be on. Right there.
So first, look at the road frontage on that lot. So that's non-conforming.
So that's already a non-conforming lot. So how does a house like that? Okay, so if that's non-conforming now, how does that continue to be non-conforming? Like, how do we create a mechanism to make a house like that conforming? Because clearly we can't use the neighbors as like a setback.
Again, I think it's an interpretation of in the code. It would be a liberal interpretation, but the access way and the parking for that associated with that is adjacent to the home, so therefore it would meet the current form-based code requirement.
So form-based code, it would be set back from the driveway, not the street, because
Right.
it's set back.
Access ways and driveways is a way you could take a measurement for those setbacks.
Okay. I was interested because you asked. No, I know it. That's why I asked. I was like, it's a very interesting case, right? Like it's.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand. I myself in a non-conforming lot, like with a house that I'd like to do some things to. So.
It's family.
But.
Is that behind? Do you have family right there? Is that like behind? Yep.
Okay,
So you built in a lot from your parents? Yep. Okay.
So I apologize, Mr. Dubois, but I want to ask that question because I thought it went directly with yours. So.
I was going to use a property on Fairview that I think had special exception to go deeper into the lot. So it would be non-conforming today, and with this change, it would be non-conforming tomorrow. It's not a net gain either way.
So can I just ask a question on that? So does that mean that you can get special exception, right? So you said they got special exception to have a non-conforming lot. I'm just trying to understand.
Look, you cannot. You can't do that. You can't have a special exception to have a non-conforming lot. Okay. The reason. Because we had a period of time where. In an effort to create infill, we encouraged that. There were individuals, for instance, like you, who created a single house, behind a house with a reasonable frontage, right?
From family.
But in conjunction with family, but what we found was we had a lot of folks do like a bunch of houses with a tiny entrance. So it was like, okay, that's not. So there was a period of time where that was very, very much allowed, which is obviously when you built your house because you were allowed to build it, so.
I also have a question about the Park Ave line. And one of the things that I appreciate from the audience in attendance tonight is providing some specific examples of things that we can process. And one of those was the line of Park Avenue, essentially. Downtown and then the other side. Part of the rationale around that has to do with infrastructure. Is that correct? I mean, we have fingers coming out of the downtown that have water, sewer, and infrastructure, some sidewalks and such. Is that, or is that not the part of the rationale? You want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so if there's not water or sewer there now, we have to provide water and sewer. So that means extending water or sewer into the areas that don't provide, that does not currently have public utilities. So I'd say majority of this area, I could click on the overlay for sewer and water, and we could take a quick look at that, certainly. But in the case that there is not, like if you look at some of these larger lots, there is 15 larger lots, 10 acres or 5 acres or more. I mean, there is some lots there, and there may not be sewer and water within the lot, but that would be the responsibility of the developer to bring that sewer and water to those lots. We're not suggesting that we meet this requirement without public utilities. And that really ties back into identifying this area as public utilities available, or they're going to be available, meaning that that would be a requirement and something that the planning board would review, and as staff we would review and say to the particular developer, you need to bring adequate public water and public sewer to these areas. And they need to meet those requirements. I can tell you that at 555 Court Street, they jumped through some hoops to meet the domestic water supply for pressure and for pipe size. And there was some growing pains there, but they had to meet it. The water district was very specific about what they needed and what they required, and it was a condition of this board that they met that requirement. And that would be something that we would certainly continue. I think it's very important that the public know that.
I just have one more of a comment, but I appreciate Mr. Daigle's comments around green space. Not really part of our conversation to this point. Maybe you can comment. I mean, the goal is around providing more housing to address a crisis, and to do it intelligently around infrastructure. But could you comment on being sensitive to having green space for our residents?
There is some open space requirement in the form-based code. So you can't develop, obviously, 100% of the lot. There has to be some open space associated with that. These smaller lots, they will be challenged to get, some people may not say it's adequate enough, but it's really infill development. So it's really utilizing what's there for infrastructure in terms of what parks are available and what public access and access to sidewalks and parks and things like that. In the bigger developments, again, we're talking about those 10 or 15 lots that are out there. That's certainly something we should look at. As we develop these larger lots, we should look at connectivity for trails. We're constantly looking at that. We're getting some projects currently right now, specifically around recreation, that the planning board will look at next month. And we're looking at connectivity for trails, even in a recreation area where they're developing baseball fields. But I think we need to continually push the limits, ask for open space, make it a requirement, and understand that that people need a place to go, kids need a place to go, and strive to either provide access to get to those locations for existing parks or connectivity to trails, or create that environment on the lot. So, and I think that that's certainly something that could be requested of this board.
As I understand it, those larger units, we have the option to review as a subdivision, which has its own set of requirements under our ordinance. And although that may not be present within form-based code, we can require up to 25% green space in reviewing it as a subdivision, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Oh,
I wanted to add on to the connectivity part that Mr. Blaze just brought up. The Complete Streets Committee has kind of changed its focus a little bit, and it has in the past been kind of approving plans by the roads for new roads or new sidewalks. And now we're actually looking forward and saying this is where we should have connectivity, and then with development, having the developer make sure that there is a path through the property to continue the connectivity, like Ms. Cook said with the sidewalks at Convenient MD earlier. But there's a lot of that, and Jonathan Labonte is sort of doing the global or macro picture on that, and that's the focus that we're looking at now to make sure that that does happen.
So one question that was intrinsic, although it was not stated as a question, it was phrased as a statement. I'll phrase it as a question. Why are we looking at this after the first reading of the council? I mean, I know why, but you want to answer? You want me to answer? But the answer is because we asked them to. We tabled it and said that we would not take action without knowing what the language of the ordinance was. So council took that to say, fine, we will give you what the language of the ordinance is within a first reading. That's why. And to the question, is there anything that permits the process? Yes, the absence of a prohibition.
If I can add to that, Evan, it was stated in the letter in the last
Yes.
paragraph.
Correct.
So it was relatively clear.
Some other explicit questions.
I do have one piece I want to address, if
Yes.
I can. The bipartisan bill, I certainly didn't look up the vote. I was referencing who sponsored the bill, and that was Speaker Fecto, Hickman, and Arata. Arata's a Republican, Fecto's Democrat, Hickman's a Democrat. And what I meant by bipartisan is those three brought the bill forward to be voted on at the state level. I certainly didn't look at the exact vote. It was interesting to see that there was a lot more Democrats versus Republicans, but that's what I was referring to. And I apologize if I misled the board on that.
One question, and actually, I apologize, the gentleman appears to have left the room. How will this affect our property taxes? I'm not even going to ask that of staff. Unfortunately, we're not the board to be able to answer that because we don't develop budget policy. So that's a question that really needs to be posed to your counselors. Looking, there were lots of statements, but not a ton of overt questions. think we've actually answered all the questions that were overt questions. I would like to take a moment, though, and say that to sort of correct the record, the reason, and it is quite clear, it's easy to go back on the public record, we said it out loud. Okay, it's on video. Was not a backroom deal. The reason that this was not extended, okay, past Minot Avenue and the Union Bypass was because we were worried that council would dismiss form-based code in its entirety, and because they were quite clear that they wanted to see how it worked in a smaller part of the city before they were willing to expand it. It was not because it was not in line with the comprehensive plan. That was not part of that process. In fact, form-based code was developed under the previous comprehensive plan. So I just wanted to make that clear. One question, one statement that keeps coming up that is really a question, although it's been phrased to us as a statement, is that the current T42B ordinance was not developed with public input and that it came directly from the council. And I will say that in conjunction with that, there have been questions about how we took up T42 to begin with. I think what was different about this zoning change is that in the recent past, prior to this, most of the zoning changes were either citizen-initiated zoning changes, so they required a petition, or they were planning board initiated zoning changes. This one was a council-initiated zoning change, and so the question as to why the council chose to develop a zone using that process is really a question for the council. But it was a council-initiated process, and that's why it came from council and not from a citizen group. And I think I've covered everything that was sort of a question or an implicit question, if anyone thinks I've missed anything. All right, excellent. At this point, I'd like to entertain discussion on the proposed amendment. Yes, Mr. Bergeron.
I think that the T4.2B is well developed and should be good at accomplishing what it's set out to, but I agree with a couple of the comments that I think it's too large of an area, and I think that from Park Ave north should be excluded from our recommendation.
Was it a response to that from anyone? I could say that my personal feeling would be that, and we've heard from members of the public who've clearly read about form-based coding, which is awesome. It's nice to have members of the public here that are well informed. That part of the goal of form-based coding is to preserve character of the neighborhood, and that's the piece that has been focused on. But these organizations that were mentioned are also quite clear that form-based codes are meant to do what all zoning codes are meant to do, which is essentially to also map out future plan. And when I think about the cost of infrastructure, it makes much more sense to implement this here, where we have infrastructure like sewer and water, than to, first of all, limit it to a scope that it won't, to the scope where it won't necessarily achieve our goal of creating infill where that exists. and also, putting it someplace else where there isn't already that infrastructure. So, I guess we're at odds on that one, on this one, in that I look at it as an appropriate place to extend it, as a place to build the neighborhoods that I live in further up Court Street.
I would argue the neighborhood we live in is not reflective of this potential change if it were to go forward. I think and again, I think that utilizing infrastructure, that's the right thing to do. Building from the downtown outward is the right thing to do. And I think we can actually accomplish a lot of our goals as far as increasing the number of residents by still doing this, but not in as large of a section that is proposed here.
Other comments?
Does, I guess I probably missed this earlier in discussion, but does the LD 2003 go over or trump any zone in the city? So, okay.
Yes, it does. Yeah, I believe you stepped out to use a restroom, but that was a question that was specifically asked by.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, by Stacy. Okay, yeah. If there's no comment, I do not want to sit here in silence. I'm going to expect.
I have quite a few
Okay, yeah.
things.
Excellent, go for
I
it.
didn't know if that
Yeah.
was done. A lot of you, but Mr. Barry in particular brought up some pretty crucial issues that are really getting left behind here as to the purpose of these changes. I know when I grew up in this neighborhood, there were more businesses in the neighborhood, and things have changed with how people use cars a lot more than they walk. But as you increase the density a little bit, but also encourage the smaller businesses up there, like an attorney or a tax accountant or more food establishments or something, you can actually decrease traffic because you encourage people to walk to places. I've lived in a few other communities and also visit many other ones, and as part of my work with the Complete Streets Committee and Bicycle Coalition of Maine, this is how you both slow traffic down and increase foot traffic along with bicycles and walking. It does work. It's done in other communities. It's been done for many years. There's a lot of cities that have been conforming like this with buildings up close to the sidewalks, which calms traffic and things like that. But also, people feel more safe when it's a lot more people on the streets walking and things, and then it kind of it can snowball. I'm not saying it's going to reduce traffic, but it can actually limit the growth of traffic, even though you're increasing the density of the population. It does work, and there's other things like Mr. Blaze said. As revenue increases, you can do other traffic mitigations things on the roads. Lake Street would be an example of how that type of road would be built to discourage traffic from going too fast. It's not a highway anymore. It was a highway when I was growing up. It was just pavement with weak sidewalks on the back. And someone had mentioned playing in the streets and stuff. I grew up across the street from Lake Street School, and we played in the streets. There were less cars then, but that's one of the purposes of this, is to get more people off the streets and doing things. And there's a lot of open space still in that area that is owned by the City of Auburn that can be developed and kept as green or as playgrounds or recreation areas. Like Lake Street School. That was every day playing in those fields. And then there's a couple properties right next to it that we played on too that were privately owned. But that's that type of community that I've seen change, actually. And people are talking about changing the character. It has kind of gone away from walking everywhere. We always rode our bikes to Pettingill Park, even up around Park Avenue. We even used to ride around Lake Auburn. There's just a lot more traffic now for that. But getting back to that, this can help do that. Whether extending it, like Mr. Bergeron said, past Park Avenue or something, whether that's the right thing to do right now, could change, but definitely a lot of these things can happen. And the other one is equity. People gain wealth, if you will, by owning things. And it's very difficult to own something in Auburn right now, to break into the market. And that's another reason why enrollment in schools would go down, because being a new homeowner, it's difficult to do in the city area where the schools are. And allowing someone to start their business in their own home eliminates a huge barrier to starting a business. And you're not losing, even if it doesn't work out, you're not really losing much except for your time. But there's a lot of equity issues that go on here that allow the community to grow and have a much more diverse population of people living in that area. And that's one of the things that is being left out of the argument here.
Other comments or questions?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
If I may. An observation, for what it's worth. When we started discussing this process, I also shared my frustration that there isn't enough of public input in the process, and I can't really seem to change that, so I empathize with the people that feel that way. But I will say, since we started talking about this, I've seen a shift from people asking questions about the merit of the proposal to the process. It seems like we've checked off concerns of the public as we've gone on, because that list has gotten smaller and smaller, and then the list of procedure has gotten larger and larger. I can't do much about procedure, but not having the specifics or having the specifics addressed enough to satisfy folks, to me tells me that our city professionals are on the right track. They spend their livelihood looking at this information and making recommendations. We have dedicated volunteers that have the best interest of the city in mind, that check and double check. And we certainly have a public, a committed public body that also wants to do the same. Seeing that shift, to me, I think speaks volumes, and therefore I'd like to make a recommendation that we support this. What I don't see is the actual outline of the proposal in order to make that motion, where I don't screw it up.
If you want to, do you want to, as is written? Okay, I'm going to help you out then. I would seek a motion to, that we forward a recommendation to the City Council to adopt the zoning text and map amendments to create the traditional neighborhood form-based code T42B zoning district, and to include 1,687.41 acres of property located in the Court Street City Residential Core area of the city within the new zoning district, as proposed and presented within the staff report presented at the September 13th, 2022 meeting of the Planning Board. So that's you saying you want this as presented?
That would be my motion, yes, sir.
Okay, so I saw the motion, so you're going to say, so moved.
So moved.
All right, is there a second?
Second.
Is there discussion? Seeing none, we'll take a vote. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion passes with a vote of 5-2. All right. For members of the public, you have become incredibly savvy, which I'm absolutely excited to see. I know I don't need to tell you, but for those listening at home, the next step in this process is that this would go to council, and I'm not sure when they've decided to do their second reading on this, so. Okay, so they put it on their next week's schedule.
Monday, the 19th, 7 o'clock.
Okay, so this upcoming Monday would be when you would want to go if you want to talk to the council about this. Our next item on the agenda is public comment. Is there anyone who would like to give public comment? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to miscellaneous. A, the mayor's ad hoc committee on development permit-ready housing plans.
So the mayor sent a memorandum to, I'm just going to keep my mask up actually, sent a memorandum to City Council and the Auburn Planning Board. I'll just read it so the public has it as well, because he's asking for input from the public too. As Auburn continues to experience high demand for multiple housing types, coupled with our continual comprehensive plan implementation, we are faced with multiple questions on what type of home, how many units are allowable, and who could design such a building are becoming common. We are also faced with residents' justified concerns that new construction will not fit into the current neighborhood aesthetic. In order to alleviate neighborhood concerns and provide a guide to builders, I am forming an ad hoc committee charged with the following: develop shovel-ready building plans that will be offered as permit-ready and free of charge. Several plans should be developed for each of the following categories. 1, townhome-style homes, standalone or up to a 4-pack, detached ADUs. 3, single-family homes on historically non-conforming lots because of minimum road frontage. And 4, duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes. The makeup of this committee will be as follows: 2 residents from each of our 5 wards, 2 planning board members chosen by either the chair or by vote of the body, city staff as deemed appropriate by the city manager, and a paid architectural firm to be chosen through the city policy. I've asked the city manager to present an RFP and budget for the architectural firm at our meeting for council approval. Timeframe will be determined by the ad hoc committee, but the goal is to submit plans to the planning board for approval or modification by February 2023. While choosing a plan from this list shall not be a mandatory condition of construction, by offering these shovel-ready plans free of charge to builders, the intent is to expedite and make new construction more cost-effective while guiding style to what is acceptable within the neighborhoods that they will be built within. So I don't know if maybe it might be time to choose now if you want to discuss or take a vote.
So, does everyone understand what the mayor's looking for? He's creating a committee to create shovel-ready plans. Those are plans that if a developer chooses them, permits will be waived because they have already been vetted by the city as being appropriate for specific neighborhoods, right? So we want these types, this is what we want in this neighborhood, this is what we want. So to encourage that, here we'll waive your permit fee. But it's going to require people to, A, determine what types of things are going to be acceptable, what those plans will look like, where they're going to be acceptable, and of course, working with the architect. Asking for 2 members of the planning board. Does anyone right now know that this is something they would like to do?
What is the commitment?
I have no idea. You can always say yes, Tony, and if it's something you can't do, we could ask another member. But if it's something that you would be interested in, I would say throw your hat in first and then find out.
I would be interested.
Is there anyone else? Okay, Brian.
I would be interested.
Brian, Paul, Tony. Okay.
I mean, you could, just to add a little to the conversation, you could have an alternate. I mean, we have an alternate planning board members, so.
Yep. Is it only 3? Okay. If the 3 of you are okay with this, I would suggest that we vote to appoint all three of you and suggest that the ad hoc committee could choose to make one of you an associate if they don't want three. I don't think we're going to get in trouble for sending more people.
That's fine. I mean,
Okay. I'll entertain a vote to appoint Tony, Paul, and Brian to the mayor's ad hoc committee for developing housing plans. I don't even know what I just said. It's late. Did I say I make a motion?
weirdly, it sounds fun.
Said you entertain a vote.
I'd entertain a vote. Okay, so I'm making a motion to appoint them. Is there a second?
I'll second that motion.
All right. All those in favor? Okay. Any opposed? Yeah, right. All right. They're appointed. So staff could take note of that?
Yep.
All right. Upcoming items for October. And this is tentative.
Yes, so October coming up, we will look at, first of all, the change around Lake Auburn from rural residential zoning to low-density country residential. We'll be looking at that in conjunction with the septic changes that we've talked about over those two joint meetings. So that will be coming forward in October. We'll also have a hockey dormitory for players. That will be a public hearing. We'll also have the suburban Little League ball fields for baseball and softball around Hotel Road. And we will be considering changing, right now the plan is to consider changing Area A. We presented on this before, but as a reminder, that's the New Auburn South Main Street area, and also Area B, which is the Vickery Road neighborhood, the Vickery neighborhood, to T-4.2B.
Can I thought about just talking to staff, but I think it's better as a planning board discussion. My sense is that I would rather not take up that item, B, next month, and I would rather take that up like in November, December, only because of the process that we've been going through. We're finally getting T42B back to the council. The last time we did that, it came back to us, and it came back to us, right? And I get the sense like I would like to see some finality on that before we continue, regardless of what the timeline is that the council wants us to do on this. I think like we've sort of been doing our best to keep up, and that's my sense. And I had considered just asking staff, but I was thinking it's really a discussion that the planning board should have. Is that something that we want to do? Is it something we don't want to do?
I am in favor of your recommendation.
Yeah. Is there anyone that really wants to take it up next month?
No, but I think maybe even C. I mean, we know A and B takes hours. I mean, honestly.
Yeah.
She's not wrong.
Yeah.
Well, and then kind of to the point of, really doing the due diligence, so let's be thoughtful and planful about it.
Yeah.
How much does C dovetail with A?
Area C? Or the
I don't think it does. The Little League?
Item C. No, the Graceland gravel pits and the Lake Auburn watershed A. I mean, that speaks to a similar audience, does it not?
It's, well, the change in, or what's before us specifically in October is just the septic ordinance change, which is like the soil standards, and doing
Oh, am I on
that
the
in
wrong thing?
conjunction with the
Okay.
change from, yeah,
All right, thank you.
I got it.
not the Grace Lawn.
Wait, there's two.
Yeah, there's two.
There's two agendas here. Which one are we looking at?
You're looking at the one that I just gave out to you tonight. The one that was.
Single page?
Yep, single page.
And Brian and I are looking at the other one.
Oh, okay.
I'm
'cause
I'm
I
looking at
was-
the other one, I'm saying.
I'm looking at the other one
I don't see
too.
Graceland pits at all.
Can I
Yeah,
see
sorry
the-
about that. I should have mentioned
I
that.
see
I
yours?
gave you an updated
Which
one because
one?
we changed
The
some.
new one? Is this the new one?
What's, and then Great Falls Plaza. Man,
That's
this is
what I have.
loaded, because I was thinking, I didn't want to slow down our workflow, so I was like, if we were already talking about changing rural residential to LDCR, I don't know if everyone watched the council, but they have a resolve, and they want us to take up looking at LDCR to rural residential in different parts of the city, so what's our timeline on that? If that's coming out, didn't that just come out of a meeting? Or were they just talking about it? Did they come up with anything formal?
Nothing that I'm aware of that's formal,
Okay.
but certainly rural res to low country density residential will be up next month.
Okay,
And at the same time, we'll address the septic ordinance, updating the septic ordinance.
okay.
So, real quick, just to clarify, I gave a new agenda because we took some items off. We only have 4 planned things, which is a public hearing, change rural res to LDCR, public hearing, Area A and Area B, which is number 2, public hearing on the suburban Little League fields, and 4 is hockey dormitory.
Tonight we had one thing on our agenda and we're still here.
Yeah.
I can't imagine us getting through A and B.
I agree.
C and D. I just don't.
I agree.
Okay. You just mentioned the other set. Which set are we looking at for next month? A through D or A through E?
through D.
We're looking at A and B.
Okay.
But
Are we
A-
looking at rural residential to LDCR? Area A for T42B, the Little League fields, and the hockey dormitory?
Yes,
That's what's going to be next month?
yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think when this was passed out, I think it wasn't clear that it was an updated agenda.
Yeah, sorry, that was.
Yeah, no worries.
No, it's, yeah.
But I think we're all in agreement that we're going to wait on the T42B because there's been so much going on with this that I think you rather stepped out of the room. I kind of brought up the idea, like, there's been so much every time we send it to the council that I would just assume them, like, make sure that that's taken care of before we, like, push forward and move forward, considering taking it up next month. I don't know if they have a timeline, like expectation of us, but at this point, you know what I mean?
That's certainly a consideration that as the chair, you could have that and make that recommendation as we
Yeah.
prepare for these.
Well, no, that's why I said, I told the board that I was just gonna talk to you guys individually, but I thought we should have the discussion. We kind of all agreed that we don't want to take that one up next month. We'll push it out.
Can we do A, C, and D?
Works for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna get stuck on this. For some reason, I thought that they discussed the LDCR to rural residential.
We did. We brought it in front of the board. We discussed it at like a workshop. That was the Evans presentation, and we really got into the nuts and bolts of the reduction of the lot sizes. There was
No. That's the, okay, yes. We're talking about the same thing?
That's right.
Okay.
Yep. And we did not discuss septic systems at that time. We needed a recommendation from council. So we've gotten that, so we're ready to move forward.
I'm not talking about the watershed. I'm talking about, they've been talking concurrently at times about doing the opposite in other parts of the city.
Right, and that's a recommendation by the board about looking at the ag zone. I think that's what I think that's what you're referring to. That came out of the council?
Yeah, it was like looking at the ag zone and looking at LDCR, looking at rural, yes. Looking at LDCR and changing it to rural residential in those areas. Am I missing something? I thought that was like a discussion they were having. I don't want to get caught having a resolve again. So like if it's something they're talking about,
Let's get that, I'll get that clarified, and I'll clarify that with the board,
okay.
with an email. I understood it as looking at the ag zone and having a committee and looking at that outside of the watershed of Lake Auburn.
Right. Okay.
So that's specifically what my understanding was. And that there needs to be, what needs to be driven out of the planning board is a recommendation on that. A yay or a nay, or how do we proceed forward?
And have they asked for that recommendation from us?
I believe they have, so we should, so as we look at items,
Can we put that next
That
month
is
then, if
something
they've
that we
asked for it? I do not want to get a situation where they've asked us and we don't do it, and then we get
Yes.
stuck with,
We can
like we
put
were
that-
before, where they're like, you're going to give it to us by this date.
we should put that on the agenda.
So can we have that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they, I'll get the date wrong, but they said they wouldn't, it's not for several months that they put on the ask.
Okay.
For when that recommendation would be. They're not gonna put it on like this calendar year. That's what they said.
So they said, exactly, okay. All right. Any other questions about miscellaneous items? Seeing none? Anything staff wants to add? I'll seek a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?